Well, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 31 of Yonin's Edge. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the EMP EDC Nymble. That's right, there's some PFM going on today, and if you don't know what that is, I'll tell you a little later in the video. So let's jump right in with basic specs as I always do. We got a drop point knife with a top swage. It is similar to a spear point, but technically I'd say it's a drop point. It's a flat grind using Bowler's M390 steel. There's a usable fine edge on this knife of 2.5 inches, 3 3/8 to the pivot, 4 inches of scale length on these titanium frag type pattern scales. This is a frame lock design that is manually deployed, and it has a couple different methods. So you have a flipper here on this side. You have a front flip tab here, which I suck at, so I'm not going to demonstrate that, but it does work pretty well. And then you've also got holes here for deploying the knife, either in the Spidey flick method or in the thumb flick method, and it does work good in both of those deployment methods as well. So I really like that. The knife actually rides on ceramic ball bearings. It has a tie pocket clip on this side, and we have an overall length on this knife from tip to tail of 6 7/8 inches. It comes in many colorways and many color variations. I should also note that on my digital scale, this knife weighed in at just 3.65 ounces. So let's jump into what I like about this knife. So prior to getting this one in my hands, and this is a loaner, by the way, I wish it wasn't, but it is, I'd heard so much positive hype from people who'd owned or reviewed this knife in the past. And I really wondered, is it going to live up to that? Am I, when I finally get one in my hands, am I really going to like it? I can tell you that the hype on this knife is real. It honestly, for me, falls right into that sweet spot size-wise for my smaller everyday carry knife. A lot of times, if I can only carry one knife, it's usually like a medium, and then I'll have something really small in my pocket, like say a Victorinox Classic, the little tiny knife. But this knife falls into that great size range for that second carry knife, and I really can appreciate the overall size of this knife a lot. So also, I love the black frag pattern. Like I said, with this blue colorway, it's probably my favorite of all the Nymbles that I have seen. They're all pretty nice, but this is probably my favorite. I really just dig this black with blue anodized colorway. I love how they did the little EMP symbol here on the middle of the pivot. That's really, really nice. And the general fit and finish on this knife is just absolutely perfect. It's amazing. I cannot find any fault with anything about the way this knife is put together or is finished. So that is perfect. Generous forward choil. Huge forward choil on this knife, so even if you got beefy fingers. Blade cutout done correctly. This is one of the few knives that I have ever picked up of any size that I can actually Spidey flick, folks. That's incredible. But the way they did this blade cutout, where they cut it out and then they recessed it along this edge, you cannot miss with your fingers getting this knife open in either position, whether it's from the front with your thumb or if you're Spidey flicking it from underneath. The design is just spot on perfect. So, you've got that. You've got jimping 2/3 of the way up the spine, which is fantastic. So whether you're in this hand position, there's a ton of jimping here, no matter where you want to put your thumb, and you can get all 4 fingers on the back of this knife in the rearward position. There's hammer grip, and I do have 4 fingers with my large glove size hands on there, just barely, but you can, and it is comfortable. But as soon as you move up into this forward position with the choil, look at all the extra jimping they gave you. I mean, you can move your hand way, way up here, and still you've got most of your thumb on the jimping on the top of the spine of this knife. And the knife is super comfortable here. There are no hot spots in this position. There are no hot spots in this back position really either, although the knife is definitely more comfortable in this position up here. The knife just feels great in either one of those spots, and this amount of jimping is a winner. So when we talk about that, we talk about the M390 blade steel. It came with a beautiful edge on it. I haven't done any super hard use cutting on it, but I have sliced some cardboard up and shaved some wood whittling and done a few things like that. And the knife has held up really well. I did re-strop this knife very lightly before I give it back to its owner, just so that it would be nice and sharp when they get it back. But it's held up great. So obviously the heat treat and the blade steel is good to go on this thing. So, as far as boxes that you got to check off, check. You get the idea. Really, I like I said, I can spidey flick this knife. I can't spidey flick hardly anything. I suck at that, but I can spidey flick this knife. Honestly, this knife checks so many boxes for me that it's just crazy. The ergos on it, normally I have trouble with liner locks, with getting them to open properly because I always have a tendency to put my fingers here. But when you hold this pocket clip the way that it's designed in the back and you put your fingers like this, it leaves your fingers away from the actual frame lock, and it's easy to just flip this knife open or to spidey flick it or whatever and not interfere with the frame lock and the detent on this knife. So all of those things are a win. The blade flies right out, and like I said, it's just over 3.5 ounces, 3.65 ounces. You kind of forget that you're carrying this knife. So when you look at the size of it, when you look at the ergos, when you look at how small the blade looks from the surface, when you look at all this stuff, you just don't think that this knife is gonna just disappear on your waist or in your pocket every day, but be there to do all kinds of great cutting tasks. And what does that equate to? PFM, pure freaking magic. I'm using the clean version of that in my review in case there are any kids out there. But there you go. I mean, like, this knife is amazing. Like, it's rare that I pick a knife up and I take it home and I review it and I think, I gotta have one. Doesn't matter. I gotta have this knife. This is one of those knives. This is one of those knives that you just wonder what kind of magical dust they sprinkled in when they designed this to make this knife so great, ergonomically, weight-wise, just feel-wise in your hand. Everything about it speaks to the quality that they're putting out in this knife. So let's talk about dislikes or issues. Despite this knife being PFM, it's not absolutely perfect. And here's a couple tiny, very minuscule little things I will point out. So it has a great pocket clip, and this actually functions really, really well. This is one of the better done pocket clips I've seen in Thai. There's a decent amount of space under here. It's not super shallow, and I like how it's shaped ergonomically with the knife, so there's no real hot spots on it. But there is no lefty love on the pocket clip. So that is the biggest thing. And then I always talk to you folks about balance points on a knife. So check it out. The balance point on this knife is back here somewhere. It is in this general location. So it's well back of center. But I have to say, seeing as how the knife has such a small, short blade and is designed to be choked up on more so than held back here, I don't really think that is a detraction. It's hard to do a lot design-wise with a knife that's this size. So I'll give them a pass on that, but it is not a perfectly balanced knife. And then, overall, the other thing that's kind of a negative for me is, even though I think this knife is well worth the price point that it comes in at, which is around $285 to $290, The bad part is, it's a small batch type of knife. You've got to get in on one and order it right away. And I feel like, man, I don't always have $300 laying around to order a Nymble. So that's a little disappointing that it's not a more readily available knife. And I think that is a drawback. But again, it's very reasonably priced for what this knife is and what you get. And the fact that, they used some, magical dust to make this knife come to life it is definitely worth the price. But that is also one of the drawbacks, is it is a little expensive for this size knife, and it also is a little difficult to get your hands on unless you happen to be able to jump in on the pre-orders. So let's talk about some size comparisons before I jump into my quick summary. So here we have the Nymble, and here we have a very popular knife, the Civivi Baby Banter. You can see this knife is quite a bit bigger than a Banter. The Banter is definitely a much smaller knife, but it's a knife that shares kind of similar ergos with the big full-size finger choil and a kind of shortish blade, although the Banter is a little bit more well-balanced. Obviously not the same quality of materials that comes in the Nymble. And then we'll show you the Giant Mouse Biblio, which is a knife I got in my collection recently. I've been carrying a lot, and these knives are very similar in size and also very similar in the actual usable cutting edge, and they both have finger choils, although I got to say the choil on the Nymble is way bigger and way more accepting of different size hands than it is on the Biblio by Giant Mouse. So there you go. And also the Biblio is quite a bit thicker of chunkier of a knife. Obviously, there's the Baby Banter next to it, and that gives you an idea. It's a pretty narrow knife. It's not a very thick knife at all, the Nymble. So I'll summarize, and I'll tell you this, that this small knife feels amazing in your hands, and during cutting tasks, it feels great. It always feels way more sturdy than you would think from a small knife like this. It's a great part of an EDC lineup, I think. If you've got the funds and you can catch it on a drop, do it. This knife has made its way into my top 3 must-have knives. Right now, this is in my top 3 of knives I have to get into my collection at some point. I want to say a big thanks and a shout out to Cue Ball for loaning me this knife, and I guarantee you I will cry like a small child lost deep in the woods when I have to eventually return this knife to him. But I will find a way to get one of these into my collection, I promise you. And it's my opinion that you should too. The EDC, the EMP EDC Nymble is definitely a knife that you want to have in your collection. Regardless of the price, I think this is one of those knives that you should go after if you're at all interested in it, because it lives up to the hype. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this review. Please hit the like button, leave me a comment. I always love those, whether they're positive or negative, and consider subscribing for future content to my channel. Thanks as always for watching, and folks, stay sharp.